Hi, I'm Ed Doge. I'm the Executive Director of Syracuse-COE. We are New York State's Center of Excellence for Environmental and Energy Systems. Folks who know us know that we have a monthly program of research and technology forums presented by our partner program. So we've got folks here in the room at Syracuse-COE and folks who are watching via the web. We'd love to welcome you all. Anyone who wants to know more about our partner program, please see Tammy Razan right here. I should tell you all about all the benefits and rights and privileges and responsibilities of our partners. Very pleased to welcome Doug Berkeley back to Syracuse-COE. Doug is the founding executive director of NEXUS-NY, which is a terrific acronym. It stands for the New Energy Accelerator in upstate New York. NEXUS-NY, a clean energy seed accelerator that's administered by High-Tech Rochester, funded by, in part by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA. Prior to joining High-Tech Rochester, Doug led efforts to commercialize novel energy storage materials developed in the research labs at Corning. Prior to that, he served as co-founder and CEO of Luminella, an optical component startup. She exited through the sale of the company's silicon photonics IP to a large Japanese firm. Other company affiliations include the Newport Corporation, where he held multiple roles, including general manager of its diffraction grading business, and Pioneer Standard Electronics, where he co-founded a new venture which generated more than $100 million of incremental revenue within 2 years of launch. So I know we have entrepreneurs here that want to know how to do $100 million in revenue within 2 years of launch. Doug holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from Temple University and an MBA from the Simon School at the University of Rochester. Without further ado, Doug Berkeley.
It's great when you write your own bio. Sounds impressive. I should just add a couple zeros onto something. Did I say 100 million? So I know a lot of the people in the room. There's a couple faces that I don't know. Maybe actually only one face that I don't know. I'll come over to you. Oh, hey, Tony. Right. Okay, I think we might have met before. Okay, good. So I try to get a sense for how to present based on who's in the audience. And so Tammy and I talked about putting this presentation together about a year ago, and broadly talked about commercializing university technologies, which is something that is kind of near and dear to my heart. And I never give up a chance to come out and talk about our program. But I tried to put together a presentation which is a little bit broader and talk generally about kind of challenges and opportunities about commercializing university technologies. A couple people in the room I want to introduce quickly. Alison Yockey, who many of you probably know already, is my colleague at High-Tech Rochester. That she's the one who helps actually get all the work done within NEXUS-NY. Gabriel Rodriguez Caero, and I want to say it for us all, Gabriel. Okay. I did a bad job of pronouncing his name, but Gabriel is a part-time postdoc at Cornell. He is a participant in NEXUS-NY in the second cohort, which we're just wrapping up right now. And Bhavin Mayani, who is also a graduate of NEXUS-NY and actually a resident here at the COE. And so we asked these two guys to come along and at the end give a couple minutes to talk about just what is their technology, what was their experience with NEXUS-NY, and more importantly, I hope to defer any Q&A to these two guys, right? So thanks for being here. So real quickly, I'll jump into it. Really, I want to try to cover a couple things today, right? This is what I think, but there may be different opinions in the room. So tech startups are you should say ridiculously hard. They really are, right? Tech startups with university technology are even harder. I think the data shows that, and I think my opinion supports that. And I think universities can help in some ways, and they can hinder in some ways. So I'm going to talk about some of that, and then I'm going to talk about what we do in our program to try to bridge this gap. Okay? please stop me at any time when I say something that's silly or unintelligible, which I certainly will do. So I thought I'd start with, kind of the end in mind, like, so what's a business, right? So anyone want to take a stab at what is a business when you're trying to create one? What is it look like? Okay, so there's a revenue component, right, which means you have customers and probably a product to sell, right? So yeah, you have a product or service, right? You have a market, hopefully customers in that market. You have a team of people, right? So you have somebody who's managing, you have somebody who's executing. That looks a lot the same when you're a startup company, right? Especially when you're a very lean startup company. And you have resources, right? And so dollars, partnerships. And one of the things I want to just point out here real quickly is that there's these huge differences between a business as a startup and a business as an ongoing business, right? So if you're a carrier corporation and you have, of course, you have multiple products and services, your products are often incremental, a little less disruptive. You have many markets, many sets of customers. Your products are often platform products, right? As a startup, you have sometimes a product concept, you have an idea that hasn't fully been developed yet. You think you know who your customers are, but no one's ever actually probably plunked down some cash yet, at least until you get going, right? People team, right? So big corporations have huge teams, lots of support staff. I remember when I started my company, I remember the first time I had to cut a purchase order, and I thought, will anybody accept this purchase order when I cut it, right? I told Allison recently, this is a kind of a funny story, but my first purchase order I cut with my startup company was for $250,000. And I had about $12 in my corporate bank account. And so I cut this purchase order, and I thought, there's no way they're going to accept it, right? They're going to check, right? And they didn't check. It was the craziest thing. They didn't check it. They took the purchase order. And the only way I had a chance to pay them for that purchase order was if the product they delivered was sellable. I could sell it. And I had a customer lined up, and that customer paid me, and the whole thing had to work. And it surprisingly did. So, but trying to figure out how do you actually, and then the other part was, well, wait a minute, how do I actually create a purchase order? What's the document look like? How do I do it? And all that stuff that when I work with big companies, you just point this up and say, hey, can you order this? So real hard. Right? And resources, I think, when you're a startup company, big companies have almost all the resources you need in the building, right? Startup company, you have to beg, borrow, and steal, find partners. You have to make what's very small look big, and big typically by extension. Okay. So difference between business. Back to the startup part, what's a fundable business? And I put this disclaimer here. A lot of people like to argue this disclaimer, but I would suggest it's kind of fact, right? A fundable startup in Syracuse, New York, Rochester, New York, upstate New York looks different than a fundable startup in Silicon Valley. Many of us wish this wasn't the case, but it is the case. So what do people want to see today in upstate New York? They want to know that the technology works, right? It can't just be a pipe dream. There was a time when you could fund pipe dreams, and there actually may be a time again in certain parts of the country for certain technologies. But for the most part, in upstate New York, especially if you have a hardware technology, people want to know that it actually works. They want to know there's a big market, right? Not just your aunt who's going to buy a widget from you. The product delivers customer value. This is a discussion that I think Allison and I have with a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs a lot, right? We talk about value proposition, and people will say, well, geez, it's better than what's on the market, and but it has to be like a lot better because there's risk in buying from a startup, and it has to be enough value that it kind of negates that risk. And then, this is not a typo down here in the bottom, but ideally there's this third-party validation. And one of my other things I love when I talk with startups is we talk about, how do you validate from a third party that the technology really works? I was with Rami Katz, most people probably know, right, from Excel Partners, and an entrepreneur was giving a pitch, and he said to the entrepreneur something that I kind of initially interpreted as being a little rude, but as I thought about it more, I thought it was right, and that was, it's hard to tell from where I sit if you're crazy or if you're a genius. And it's really true, right? I mean, we all are very passionate about our technologies when we start companies, but it's hard to tell from your side of the desk. Do you really have? How do we vet technologies, right? You're the expert. We're not the expert. And so you know, like a letter of support from a customer is as opposed to a letter of intent. This is kind of a little typo down here, right? So, you know, a letter of intent says, if you do something, I will do something, right? You produce a product that meets these specs, and I'm going to buy it. Letter of support says, hey, you know, you're working on cool stuff, and I really like what you're working on. There's just this huge difference between those two things. And so having real customer support, you know, ideally a customer paying money, you know, NRE is so much better than a letter. But typically this is what people want to see in that statement.
Could you say?
Yes.
Sorry, can you go back?
Yeah.
So if we're in New York City or Boston or Silicon Valley, how would it be different?
I think there's more of a culture of risk taking, and I think there's a supply and demand issue, right? So I mean, the thing that's missing, in my opinion, in Western New York is that we don't have enough exits. So that means there's not enough people who've done it and have a lot of money in their pocket and are willing to get involved and invest their money, right? So just to me, there's just more, I think there's just more people like that in bigger communities. I don't know.
So maybe we'll come back to this.
And technologies are different in some of those places too, right? New York City, you can't start a hardware company in New York City, right? You go out of business paying your rent before you ever got to market. So, right? Not a lot of biofuel companies in New York City.
Yeah. So I'm interested just in the phenomenon of the proximity of investors to the startup. So the hypothesis that in Silicon Valley, people are meeting socially, meeting in coffee shops, same thing in New York City, same thing in Boston. So where the investors can see the firm that they've invested in, even routine. So because of the, if we're going to investors that are out of town, it's like an inherently higher risk. So they're going to raise the bar.
Yeah, they may not even be risk, it's time, right? I mean, if I can invest in two things, one lives next door to me and one lives across the country, which one's easier to manage and spend time with, right? People, because we're in Syracuse, I assume most people here know Martin Babinek, right? In Upstate Venture Connect. If you've seen the TED Talk that he gave on this whole thing, it's on. I think it's on the UVC homepage. You should take a look at it. But he talks about his experience starting a company in Silicon Valley and why he thinks it's different to Syracuse specifically. And he said it was a couple things. It was a lot of it's cultural, right? People, you're in Syracuse and in the coffee shop, and you say to somebody, "Hey, I'm starting a company," and they go, "Oh." You know? But in California, people go, "That's great. I'm going to help you. What do you need? Can I make some connections for you?" Right? And I think it's cultural, and it's just experiential. It's not that it can't be done here. There's many attributes here that those places don't have, right? It's a cheap place to live. Lots of resources. Look at this building. I don't think anything like this exists in Silicon Valley, right? You guys look at Starbucks. So I don't know. This statistic of 90% of startups failing, I don't know if it's right. It kind of feels right. People use this all the time, and I actually looked for some supporting evidence, and I could find that. So I figured, I'll just use it and not support it. Yeah.
It depends on whether or not you want to be encouraging or discouraging.
Well, I think it's important, regardless of the number, to try to figure out what are the attributes of the ones that succeed as opposed to those that fail, right? So CB Insights puts together this. Has anybody seen this thing that CB Insights is? They followed, I think they're up to 105 startups that have failed, and they go through and they do this triage of why they failed. What's interesting about this list of companies is that every one, 101, I'm sorry, that's right up there. Every one of these was funded. So they all have received some kind of venture capital. I think the median statistics here are that these companies fail 20 months on average after they're funded, and they typically receive $1.3 million in funding, right? And so you think well, geez, if they're funded by VCs, like, why is this no market need at the top of the list, right? I mean, it's interesting when you look at, they ran out of cash, right? So obviously the VCs didn't love them that much because they wouldn't put more money in. Not the right team. So there's all these things, as you go down, and you could read this.
So in this, you only give one reason?
Well, obviously not, because, even my bad math says, this adds up to much more than 100%, right? So there's multiple reasons per company. But I think the interesting thing here, though, is if you look at this, and I kind of looked at it and I said, well, no market need means you didn't know the market very well before you started, right? So the product didn't fit the market. Yes? Oh, so pivot is this whole concept of, I'm building software for a nuclear reactor, and I realize that that market doesn't actually need my technology, but the toy market does, and so I pivot to another opportunity, right? It's the ability to be somewhat agile in where you point your technology. Yeah. So, so there's this whole thing. If you kind of look at these issues, really, to me, the constant theme or the common theme is it's all about understanding product market fit, and it's all about, you ran out of cash. Well, why do you run out of cash, right? Because you don't have customers, which means that the customers don't need what you're selling, right? Not the right team. That's a management issue. You get out-competed. Why do you get out-competed? Because you didn't understand the customers, or you didn't understand the competition, you didn't have the right product, right? And so, if you go through this list, it ends up being a lot of the same stuff, right? And so, what's the point, I guess? The point is you only have to get two things right? You have to know the market, and you have to execute pretty well, right? So, it's like, what's the old saying, though, that first step's a doozy, right? So these are obviously two huge things. Yes?
Quick question on the previous slide. DFM with a question mark?
Yeah.
What is DFM?
Design for manufacturing or something, maybe?
Sorry, thanks.
Yeah, sorry. I yell at people who put acronyms up that don't make any sense, so thank you for that. So, these are actually really two hard things, but at the end of the day, if knowing your customer and knowing and being able to execute are it's what it's all about, right? So kind of thinking about universities kind of for a minute, the purpose of the talk here is, you think about more than half of the basic research in the U.S. takes place in universities. I think the latest statistics I saw, somewhere like between 2.5% and 3% of GDP is spent on fundamental research in the U.S., right? So 3% times 17 trillion is, what's it, $500 million or something along those lines. $500 billion, excuse me. And about half of it is spent in universities, right? So $250 billion in university research. These guys, the Association for University Technology Managers, they do a survey every couple of years. I was too cheap to buy it, so I had to go back and look at one of the old ones that somebody had summarized. And so 2010 survey, which kind of looked back even further, so going back to 2008, about 600 companies were founded by faculty researchers, right? Not really very many, and in fact, if you do the napkin back of the bar math, you find it's like 1 for every $300 million that's invested. That's actually a pretty interesting statistic, right? And that's the ones that are started. Again, if you think that 90% fail, now you're talking about another, it's $3 billion for every successful startup. Those are abysmal statistics. And really, what's easy to track are these things which don't mean anything, right? Okay, licenses executed, so what? You don't sell anything, doesn't matter. New products taken to market, so what? If no one buys it, it doesn't matter, right? Patents. I've got a couple patents I'm happy to sell. Anybody in the room after this discussion? Because they're worthless, because nobody cares. So it's universities, just by the statistics, don't do very well with this, right? And so why is that? Technology's early, right? Basic research means early technology. So technology hasn't been de-risked. You talk to a PI at a university and you hear things like, well, who wants to use your technology? Everybody wants to use it. And it's like, well, can you be just a little more specific? And sometimes, everyone means no one, right? Because it's if you don't know exactly who wants it, it's tough, right? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. That's what universities are supposed to do, right? We're training scientists. We're doing fundamental research, which may solve a problem that we are not even tackling today, right? These are all good things. There's not a problem with it, but it doesn't necessarily lead to successful startups. Unencumbered resources are scarce, right? You know, Bob, and when you were trying to start your company at ESF and you needed $5,000 to go run a reaction, you can find money to do very specific things related to very specific funding sources, right? Same with you, Gabriel. It's very hard to find money that says, hey, just go buy a market research report and play in the lab for a couple of weeks, right? Universities and scientists, specifically in scientific labs, especially the best scientific labs, they have scientists in them. Not a lot of business people floating around. And so, a lot of startups get stuck in this tech-centric mindset. It's really hard. I like to say, and people hate it when I say it, but I'm going to keep saying it until someone tells me that. Someone convinces me I'm wrong. And it's as hard as it is to invent a cool technology, it's maybe harder to bring it to market. And it's just really hard, right? Because customers are risk averse, and you have to really understand the process of how people buy things. Elsa and I were talking to one of our entrepreneurs from this cohort, and we said, who's your most likely customer? And they say, well, it's Samsung. We said, okay, well, how does Samsung buy? And we're like, well, what do you mean how they buy? My stuff's better. They're just going to buy it, right? But the whole process of, well, how long does it take? How many kilograms do you need to produce before they're actually qualified? How many factories do you need to have to set up? What do they need to see from a supplier? Very, very hard to get that stuff figured out. And the other part is, this is really hard. This is not a university thing, although I think it is exacerbated within a university. None of us like to admit we have an ugly baby, right? And even worse, none of us like to tell others they have ugly babies. So, if I go out and say, hey, Bob, what do you think about my technology? You say, oh, that's nice, that's neat, right? It's not committing to buy it, it's not committing to do anything with it, but really, really hard to go out and figure out what the market actually wants. And just like I couldn't go into your lab and synthesize a new biofuel, it's hard for you to go out to the market and do the business development, right? So this research versus development versus engineering are, again, very different tasks, right? To get something to work in a lab at a small scale versus work at a customer premise is a hugely different challenge. And the engineering skills tend not to often reside at universities and research labs. This burning the boats, right? I think it was when the Spanish invaded Mexico. Right, they burn the boats, right? There's no escape strategy. We either win the war or we die trying, right? When I'm a PI at a university and I'm working on technology, I'll dabble in my startup, but I've always got my day job to fall back on. So this is, there's not a full commitment necessarily, right? And universities often don't. I'm going to touch on this quickly with the risk of insulting some people, but just a few observations, right? Tech transfer offices, they really focus on legal, licensing, PI compliance issues, right? They're not there necessarily to help startup companies. My experience is they focus much more on licensing terms than success factors. What's the right royalty rate? Who cares if nobody buys anything? Quick repayment of patent fees, which is really, as a startup company, a couple of entrepreneurs in the room here, what's the one thing you don't have? Money, right? What's the one thing you do have? The ability to move quickly. You have agility. You can make decisions quickly. You're not hindered by some big company organization. So asking somebody who's most of their resources money to give them money up front, it just seems like it's promoting the wrong outcomes. Commercialization. I don't know. The scientists in the room. I think this is changing, but still, I see it more on the medical side, where you're actually viewed by your peers sometimes negatively if you're pursuing commercialization as opposed to pure research. Some universities are starting these tech maturation grades. So SUNY has this, what do they call it? Tech Acceleration Fund. Cornell has a Tech Development Fund. Oh, CTAM, right? Cornell Technology Acceleration and Maturation. Yeah. None of their acronyms are as cool as ours, but they have money. And so it's like, you know, what is it, $30,000 to $50,000 kind of thing, and they tend to be unencumbered, but it still ends up, those monies still are spent looking a lot like research. It's not, they tend to be, if we can move the technology up a TRL level, is really the question they're trying to answer. What they sometimes avoid doing is saying, does anybody care? Right? Is there really a problem for the solution that's being developed? So if I was king, you know, this is what I would do. I'd keep these licenses simple, and I wouldn't ask entrepreneurs for a lot of money up front. I'd try to help them form partnerships. That's the one thing universities do have, is lots of connections and alumni networks, and they can actually help you find your first customers, find your partners. You know, I know this is the third rail, but commercialization is you know, it's not typically it's not something that is looked at, right? So you have a PI who's always conflicted, right? And startup culture, I'll talk about this more in a second, but when I talk about this, people always say, well, you know, MIT and Stanford do this fabulously, right? They're churning out startups like crazy, and that's true, right? So if you look at MIT, there's been a couple of studies that have been published, and so 5,800 companies that were started by MIT graduates in this.
Right out of the blocks.
No, these are, this is, you know, any prior MIT graduate, and this is over this time period. But still, it's an incredible number.
So is that 90% rule applicable out here?
I don't know.
This is still the start. So how many survive? Right?
Yeah.
20 miles. So here's another interesting statistic, right? So they generated approximately $2 trillion in annual revenue. So if you look at MIT startups as a global economy, it'd be the 11th biggest economy in the world, right? So now, are these numbers exactly correct? I don't know. The study was actually put together by the MIT Market Trust Center. But there's a thread of truth here, right? I don't think anyone would argue that something is going on at MIT and Stanford, right? But if you look at the tech transfer office, you go back to that same autumn study, and you say, well, what was going on in the university? And you say, okay, lots of invention disclosures, as you would expect. I think MIT had the most patent applications that year, lots of license agreements, but only 16 startups, right? And so what's the disconnect here? I mean, anybody notice the obvious disconnect, right?
We left MIT.
Maybe. I mean, yes.
It's the focus on technology transfer, not technology commercialization.
Well, that's you stole the punchline. Right? But I mean, so 5,800 companies, but only 16 startups. It just seems like a huge disconnect, right? And so the punchline is that the startups from MIT don't come through the tech transfer office. They don't happen the way that this was a surprise for me when I heard this. And I actually heard this story originally from Bill Allett, who runs the Martin Trust Center at MIT. And he said people don't really understand what happens at MIT. It's not that we have great labs and great scientists, because we do, but those exist other places. It's that we have startup culture. People come here to specifically start a company. They come to the PhD program not because they want to finish their PhD, but because they want to jump on a startup. And the same thing with their MBA program. And so it's really, I think, culture trumps all else. Okay. All right. So back to our program for a minute. You know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help solve this problem. We have a narrow charter. So we are very specifically focused on clean energy things, and that goes to the funding source that Ed mentioned. We're funded by NYSERDA. But the whole point here, we're trying to accelerate the creation of startup companies within the field of clean energy. And we do that by really asking program participants to do three things. And these three things should look familiar from the previous slide, right? It's figure out, does anybody care, right? I know you've got great technology, but does it solve a real world problem? And does it do it so in a way that allows you to use that technology as a platform for a startup company? Right? We want to de-risk the technology. We do that by funding prototype development. And then we want the companies that graduate from our program to have some third-party validation. Right? Ideally, we're prototyping with a customer. They've tested our products. And so what do we do? So actually, if you ask NYSERDA, we're a proof of concept center. we've actually stopped using that term a little bit internally because it doesn't. I don't think it means that much. People understand seed accelerators, right? We provide cash and we provide some support and services. And what's unusual is that most seed accelerators actually ask for equity. We don't ask for equity because we're a not-for-profit and if somebody's willing to fund us, right? So not a bad deal for the companies involved. So we think that entrepreneurs need money to get going, and so we have money. This number's got a couple of pluses next to it. Could have a couple of asterisks next to it. It's the answer here is that the reality here is we actually have a couple different phases in the program. The details probably aren't all that important, but some of it we have. I think we end up spending on average about $70,000 per team that's in the program. Some of it goes to service providers. So, the Syracuse Tech Commercialization Law Program helps us do some intellectual property assessments. We have a venture capital firm that does some due diligence work. We actually have a mentor pool that help the startup. So there's, but really, I think about $50,000 of cash is kind of what you can count on to do some of the prototyping and other things. Business support, I just mentioned. I'll show you the services I missed in a minute. We think, understanding customers is important, and that's why we have this whole customer discovery process that we rigorously work through with our teams. And then a community, right? So working with peers who are at the same stage. Customer introductions are actually interesting. We've had a chance to do lots of this. We have a company in the program this year who is working on some metrology and really for kind of semiconductor testing, and he kept telling us, well, but there's all these applications in thin films too. And we said, well, what are they? We don't understand them. And so finally, I had a chance to, I have a friend who's the CTO of a battery company, and I called up my friend. I said, will you talk to this entrepreneur and figure out, is there really an application for his tool in your workflow? And I had him on the phone for 5 minutes, and they started speaking a different language, maybe a little bit Martian. But long story short, there's actually a pilot program that's taking place as a result of that curated introduction. And so we're not that lucky all the time, but we do have enough contacts through our network, especially within our, we've got all the mentors that we have in the program. And so a lot of those things happen within the course of the program. Busy slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here, but we have an application process. It's a competitive application process. We have a 2-day kickoff, 2 or 3-day kickoff in Rochester. It's the only time we really physically require everybody to get together. It's Ellison and I work from Rochester. We accept teams from all over the state, and we do a lot of the program virtually. We spend about a dozen weeks working on just business model development. A lot of this is talking to customers, figuring out what is their real problem. And then we get into the second phase of the program, which really is where the money comes. And we talked about building prototypes. We have a venture capital firm that we've partnered with. It's really kind of a neat process in that venture capitalists can be intimidating, not that friendly, not that open, and if you screw it up the first time, they don't want to talk to you again. We've partnered with a company to say, hey, look, this is a learning process. We're going to bring companies in whose plans are not fully baked, and what we need you to do is not tear them apart, but help them bake them. And they actually assign analysts to work with the teams to get their story in shape. And it's, I think it's a great process. It resulted last year in a couple of companies that graduated from our program being offered term sheets because, hey, in the process, the venture firm gets to know the teams, and it's a good process. IP assessments, I mentioned the Syracuse Law Center. We have some second-level support we offer for some teams. And we're doing something new this year. So this second cohort, we haven't actually fully fleshed out the details, but our program is a cost reimbursement program. So Gabriel has a statement of work that he created to be in the program. He's going to do certain technical work. We're going to reimburse certain things. The big surprise for us in the first year was people didn't spend the money that we allowed us, right? And so we had money left over. And so last year we said, well, let's just create some other grants at the back end, and we'll just find who's doing the best, and we'll give them a little bit more money and help them get to the next commercialization milestone. This year, we're going to take that money and we're going to use it to make equity investments in a couple of companies. So who should apply to the program? There's this really a sweet spot. Again, this is a busy slide, but the bottom line is we're looking for early stage technologies. We're looking for things that make a big energy impact. We're looking for really early stage companies, and we don't have unlimited funds. So obviously you can't commercialize anything. I don't think you can commercialize anything. Very few things, for $50,000, but you can get to meaningful commercialization milestones, right? So the point here is our program should be a catalyst that gets you to the point where you can attract further investments. And obviously we'd like people to have strong IP.
Question.
Yeah.
TRLs.
Yeah.
So there's a pond for NYSERDA that's due on Thursday.
Yeah.
And so some of us are just having our first experience with a calculator that's produced by NYSERDA.
Yeah.
That produces something that's called a TRL.
Right.
But it seems not to be the TRL we're accustomed to.
From the DOD or the
DOE.
DOE.
Yeah. In fact, it looks like it's a venture readiness.
Oh.
But they're calling it TRL and CRL.
Yeah.
So is this? So actually, I wonder, how is that NYSERDA TRL, or is that like NASA?
No, the way we use these is that we ask in our application for applicants to self-identify their technology readiness level using the DOE's definitions. Yeah. So this is really good. I mean, we're not really all about precision here. We want to get in the ballpark, right?
So
early stage.
Have you been exposed to NYSERDA's?
I have seen their tool. I have not spent a lot of time with it. Yeah. And then this whole CRL thing is kind of a new thing that I think came out of some of Steve Blank's work. Where it's an interesting tool. I mean, the problem is.
So could you be a voice in the field to say NYSERDA made a decision to introduce a new tool using the words TRL and CRL?
Yes.
Totally different number systems.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I trust what you're saying.
I think it's a bad idea.
Yeah. The problem with CRL is that you're asking people to self-identify, and they don't self-identify, right? I mean, it goes back to, hey, I show you my widget. That's really cool, right?
It's ready to go.
But until you have a purchase order or a contract or NRE or something, so I think everybody overestimates where they are commercially. Okay. So this is the purpose here is a couple, this is who's involved in the second cohort. We have a two-phase program. So again, first phase is this customer discovery, prove that there's actually a problem for the solution you've created. And really what we're looking for is evidence that a customer cares about what you're working on, very specifically. And so, so what do we have here? We have teams that are both university-based, so RPI, Binghamton, Cornell, RIT, Cornell, and then we have community-based teams, so Solstice from here in Syracuse. These guys are in Rochester, Corning, Rochester. So we don't really, the original charter of the Proof of Concept Center was to translate university research, but we found there's things in the general community that have the same attributes, right? There's real R&D that's supported it. It's early stage, it's potentially big energy impact. And so we talked to NYSERDA about it, and they were happy to have us open the aperture a little bit. And we're technology agnostic, right? We only care that if there's an energy argument. So I don't know if I'll spend a lot of time on this. I guess I'll just look through quickly. A couple companies. These are both Cohort 1 company, Conamix. This also came out of a Cornell research lab. Really interesting idea for developing novel lithium-ion battery anodes. What's cool about it is higher charge capacity, so hopefully more higher energy potential batteries. But they also have a process whereby they can grow silicon right on a current collector, and so it's kind of a roll-to-roll process for making these things. Really neat. They did some really interesting early work in the lab. They did receive a term sheet from a venture capitalist. They've actually made a lot of progress since I last updated this sheet. Yeah, so these guys are doing well.
Can I ask who the people in the company were? Was it students, professor?
Yeah, so they entered the program with, so this was actually kind of an interesting case where there was a PI who was very involved in the program, which is unusual. We don't find many PIs who are willing to spend 20 plus hours a week. He had a postdoc, I believe, and a master's level engineering student who were involved in the program with him. We connected him with a mentor who happened to be an entrepreneur who had started a couple of companies previously with Cornell-based technology. So it turns out the actual company formed between the mentor and the PI. So long answer to what seemed like a simple question, but it was, yeah.
I mean, anecdotally, I hear the key to some of these university startups is having a really engaged grad student or postdoc who wants to take the technology that's business-minded.
Yeah.
Are you finding that's true in the next step, or is it different years ago?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. PIs aren't going to do a good job. Out there, you kind of hit some other punchline of the presentation. Yes, you're right. I mean, it's very rare to find a PI that's even going to spend more than a couple hours a week, right? So Gabriel, and with his technology, has probably a couple of the most highly regarded PIs at Cornell that are, advisors to the program. But they're willing to spend a few hours a week to give you advice, right? And largely technical advice. So it is rare. These guys are community-based guys. Another interesting story. So General Motors had their fuel cell R&D center just outside of Rochester. They closed it down in 2008, or they moved it back to Detroit in 2008. So these were a couple guys who actually ran the technical side of that work, and they did really well through the course of our program. So you can see they've set up their own lab. They're building systems. They actually sold a couple of MBAs. They won some pretty big grants afterwards. Really good progress as well, and again, from the community as opposed to from the university. And so, to your point earlier, so we're winding down our cohort 2. We're going to be recruiting for cohort 3 here within the next month or so. But we're planning to introduce a third option, and that is so kind of follows these hypotheses, right? So some of the best technologies don't have a commercialization champion. Even those that have a commercialization champion, frankly, may not have someone who has the business acumen to take that technology to market, right? And so, that goes to the second point here, which is really hard. And so, what we're trying to look for now is a couple technologies where we say, hey, you're interested in seeing your technology commercialized. We know you're not going to spend 20 hours a week. Submit the technology anyhow. We'll build a professional, business development team around that technology, and we want to run a couple of pilot cases in our next cohort. So we'll see how it goes. It's easy to put those bullets on a slide. I think it's hard to execute, especially with universities, right? So who owns the technology? What's the license? And I think we recognize that we have to demonstrate that the process works. So we're kind of going to punt on some of the technology ownership stuff. Cornell has agreed to partner with us on this, although I don't think they're going to actively look for the technology, so we have to go find them on our own. But we're certainly happy to have recommendations from people in the room. And so kind of some dates for the program. So our application window opens October 15th, runs through November 15th. We have a demo day in Rochester, October 27th. I'm going to show you a little bit of information about that. There's this Clean Tech Summit, October 19th and 20th, down in New York City, which is, so it's Nexus, it is Clean Tech Open, and NECEC, PowerBridge, which is the other downstate proof of concept center. Is Acre now involved, Allison? So Acre is the Clean Tech incubator down there. So the plan is to have about 60 startup companies, it is now. Is that right? Yeah. It's part of a showcase. It's the regional finals for Clean Tech Open. Going to be some presentations from Nexus companies, other companies. So kind of a neat place to go and see a lot of startups in one spot. And we're having a pre-seed workshop in Rochester on the November 6th and 13th. Are people in the room familiar with pre-seed workshop, right? A couple days just to kind of figure out, thinking about commercializing your technology, what's all involved. We're going to have a little bit of a clean energy focus, and we're trying to recruit companies that might be Nexus applicants and have them participate. It's a chance for us to get to know them and them to get to know us before making the full commitment.
I think I was this.
In Syracuse, yeah. Perfect. That would be typical. Yeah. And then, so I mentioned we're having this demo day, and it's actually, I think it's going to be a really cool event. We've been working on this quite a bit, Allison more than I, but it's at the George Eastman House, which is, the founder of Eastman Kodak. It's where he used to live. It's now a museum. We actually spent a little bit of money to bring this guy in to talk. He's written a bunch of books. Has anybody read any of his books or know his background? Right. So he's an astrophysicist. That's right. Yeah. He's an astrophysicist, right? So it's like this really goofy thing. Why would bring this guy into an energy event? And but he's the best person I've ever seen at communicating complex things simply. And he has this really interesting talk that he gives on innovation, exploration, and discovery, which are, of course, at the root of what we know about the universe, but also, I think, at the root of entrepreneurship as well. So he's a cool guy. He's been on Big Bang Theory. He's been in a couple movies. He's had a couple of his books have been turned into miniseries. Nova's created miniseries out of that first book and one of his subsequent books. So I think it's going to be really fun event. Certainly there'll be lots of networking. There'll be food. There'll be drinks. Access to the museum. So we have 500 seats we need to fill, so I need you all there. And if you all could everyone commit to bring 6 friends with them?
When is it?
Allison, contract. It is October 27th. It's a Tuesday evening. Probably going to start around 4:30. Is that what we? Okay. So Allison is just finishing the registration link. I think tomorrow it's going to go out.
If you want to share your email.
So before we break, I actually would like to have both Bob and Gabriel come up and maybe just a couple minutes, just elevator pitch about your company. If you want to say a couple things about your experience with Nexus, that'd be wonderful. And then I'll sit and you guys can take the Q&A. You're up first. You're standing.
Okay, so my name is Gabriel Rodriguez Calero, or Gabriel Rodriguez Calero, as Doug would like to say in proper Spanish. And I am a co-founder and CEO of Electro. Now, what we do is we sell membranes, and membranes for what? Membranes for fuel cells. Why is this important? Because fuel cells currently are very expensive, and they have been expensive for the last 20, 30 years. And part of the reason is because ever since their development in the 1960s, or actually in the 1800s by Sir William Groth, if you want to go all the way back, they were performing in acidic electrolytes and using platinum catalysts. As we all know, platinum is not very inexpensive, and you can bring down all the components, system components down, except the cost of the precious metal. So what we're targeting with our novel polymers is really making the enabling component for platinum-free fuel cells, and that's what we've been doing through the NEXUS-NY program, developing the first couple of prototypes and really proving that this can be done. And so far, we've done pretty good progress. To credit the Nexus team, they've really given us tools to make sure we're tackling things that customers value as a problem. We've talked to 52 people in the fuel cell clean energy fields and found out that this is a big problem, and they're looking at these problems in commercial companies today, right? So if we can actually deliver on our value proposition, there would be a need for our products. Maybe to share a little bit of background about myself, I finished my PhD at Cornell a year and a half ago, roughly. and I decided to stick around exploring opportunities in the clean energy space. I'm very passionate about this, so I found this technology in Cornell's portfolio of companies, or of technologies, I should say, and saw that the potential for this particular technology was to really disrupt the way we make things today. And that's why I stuck around and I founded this company with a couple of my colleagues, and that's why we're working on this very difficult problem.
So it's interesting, this is not your PhD work.
That is correct, yeah.
So what was your PhD?
I worked in material science, and I was blessed enough to be in a group that had a lot of funding and had a lot of interesting projects. So I worked on battery materials research. I worked on photovoltaic systems. I worked a little bit on fuel cell systems. I didn't touch this particular technology, but I touched the related fields. I was also quite unconventional in that I started doing undergrad research in my sophomore year. And I worked 3 years in fuel cell research at the University of Puerto Rico at Rio Piedras, which is where I did my bachelor's degree. So I had 2 publications in fuel cell research before I even started grad school, which is not very traditional in the way researchers started researching cool things as scientists.
When you started your PhD, did you imagine that you were going to?
Not really. I came to Cornell because I particularly liked the research in renewable energy they were doing. I did, what do they call them, REU programs, and I loved it here. I didn't know the winter, of course. I figured that was done quickly.
It's a little different than Porter.
Just a little bit different, you know, but yeah, I really liked it, and I liked it enough that I'm sticking around trying to work on, things that I'm really passionate about.
Why do you think Cornell didn't just license the membrane technology?
Well, it's partly this is very complicated, and perhaps it's going to be very biased by my opinion. With that said, I think often enough you find researchers who are very good at a particular field, and even though they collaborate, it's hard taking a material that's developed in one group and have it fully tested in a different group. You need really a dedicated person who prototypes things and who understands the technology both from the fundamental material science level and the full characterization level at making sample preparation. I did most of my work doing electrochemistry, and measuring electrochemical performance is very easy. Sample preparation is 99% as important as the resulting data that you get. And in that 99% areas that really people struggle to get good characterization for that data or for those materials.
So you membrane company with this data certainly review from class integration. And the reason I ask is, the fuel cell world has got a lot of different technologies that focus on PDAs, single side, and often it seems it's really challenging because all the steps along the way, integrated or vertically integrated economy to actually get something out there.
Yeah.
How do you rationalize that? How do you move it forward to something, right?
So that's a very good question. Part of what we're trying to do, and I say trying because we're very early stage, right, is we are actually making membrane electrode assemblies, and we're developing all those capabilities. The idea is that once we know how to do it, we would partner with someone to help us achieve scale. I mean, I'm sure we could do it in the lab scale. I mean, I've done many sample preparations of different things in the lab scale, and I'm not worried about that part. I'm more worried about the, scaling up, making sure all the steps along the process are checked, and that vertical integration that you're referring to is followed up successfully. So we're really good at making polymers. We're really good at making these particular polymers that, to our knowledge, are the best of their kind. And even though we're developing this market verticals to prove value proposition, right? Because in the end, people are going to buy our stuff because of what we're able to do that nobody else can do. We're still developing those capabilities, and in the end, it might turn out that we have to play at a different level in the supply chain. But so far, this is our operating hypothesis, that if we can improve the value proposition at the lab scale, we can then partner with someone who would have enough interest in our materials to essentially scale that operation up.
So you said you have other partners on your team. Were any of your partners involved in the development of the IP?
Yes. So we have a very talented, freshly minted PhD chemist, Christina Huger. She has worked with alkaline and ion exchange membranes for her entire PhD work.
So is she in the lab that developed the
Yes.
technology?
Yes. And we brought her on board earlier this year. We also have a business development person on board, and he's doing most of our financials and the business analysis and all those things.
This seems like proof of concept of the concept that you're about to roll out, about looking for ideas that have commercial potential and putting together a business development. So this was like a
yeah, maybe. I think it's a little different, right? Because I think Gabriel went. He did. No, yeah. It's unusual. We haven't had anybody do what Gabriel's done. He's gone and sought out and looked through patent portfolio. And Cornell's very unusual too in that they're willing to support that. I think a lot of universities wouldn't have supported that, right? This isn't your technology, and you want to commercialize it. No. Right?
They still retain some kind of license.
So we're still working on executing that license with Cornell. So we still don't have a license for the technology. We're working with them to get that.
About the original PI got that.
They're part of our scientific advisory board. Yeah, so they're
okay with you using this.
Yeah. Well, he's part of the company.
Yeah. So would you go to him and like, hey, I like the technology, I want to start a company with that?
Yeah, and part of the thing, I've been in Cornell a long time. You do a PhD, you inevitably end up in a place where, a long tenure. So this professor who invented the technology, he was part of my thesis committee, right? So I had a previous relationship with him. He knew me as a scientist. He knew who I was. It wasn't that I out of the blue came up to him and say, hey, just have to run through this, right? And also I was part of the Energy Material Center there for 5 years as well. So I've seen the development of this technology through the years. I saw many technologies that way.
So I don't know anybody who doesn't know about it.
Well, to be quite honest, I've given many pitches, but still my hands sweat. Many.
I was waiting for you to laugh when Gabriel said he talked to 52 customers, because I think he talked to like 3 million or something. Thrown out of a couple lobbies.
Yeah. Does anybody shop online? If you do, raise your hands. Everybody does, right? How does it get shipped to you? Container cardboard, right? You think that this thing gets recycled again and again, but every time it gets recycled, the fibers in it get shorter and shorter. Comes a time when you can't recycle. Where does it all go?
Away.
not in my backyard. So they typically pay what we call tipping fees and hauling fees to send it away to landfill. My idea is to use that waste, which is already beaten up. I don't have to beat it. It's already beaten up. It's pretty homogeneous, and make chemicals out of it. I'm sure everybody has heard of a little company based in Rochester called Sweetwater. They make sugars, right? They make it out of agricultural residues. I make it out of waste from paper mills. Don't have to do a lot of steps that my competitors do. I'm not pointing at anybody out here right now, but saving money out there, helping the paper industry, which is already criticized that it's not environmental friendly, you cut down our trees and whatnot. So helping them become more sustainable, and at the same time creating a product that can make biofuel, bioplastics, all those other materials. So using ways to make something more greener, just helping two industries connect with each other. So, that's our main goal, helping two industries connect with each other. And to do that, a lot of people have helped me on the way, Tech Garden, COE, NEXUS-New York, and recently NSF. But it's been a long road. Ever since I graduated, right before I graduated, I had a job, but I declined that. I met Seth Mulligan, who told me, pursue your dream, and so did my parents. But follow your dream, and so I did follow it for a year. When I first got into Clean Tech Open, and before that pre-seed workshop, but I did not realize what was it all about until I got under Doug's wings. And he actually showed me. You can go and talk with numerous people. I talked with more than 150 people in less than a month and a half, and I called it quits. But it wasn't that important. It was about who will entertain you after the next program is done. Who will buy your product. When I was in my phase 2 in Nexus, we got $35,000 and whatnot. We were happy we got that. We interviewed many people, but then sending out samples, people to actually take those samples was a big deal. And to make those people work on those samples and give us back our feedback, that was another milestone. One of really big companies, they had a sample, they sat on it. My product is sugars, so they degrade in a few days. By the time they started working on it, the sugars had long disappeared. So luckily, there was another potential customer that we started working with, and they were really quick on their feedback. And you might not realize the operational problem that you might have to overcome. Even when you're working on lab scale, having a partner work on their stuff on their end of the bargain, even because it does not cost them anything. So they haven't paid anything. So it's about pushing them to actually work on their end of the bargain. So that's what Doug taught me. That's what Nexus taught me. It was quite a big learning curve. Thanks to all that, right now we are working with 2 customers, and their feedback has been really important. Right now we have a lab downstairs. I can show off my sugars and bioplastics today because of the grants that we have received. Earlier I could only show off my sugars. Okay, this is my product, but my product can actually perform what Doug was talking about. Does that technology work? That was the big question, right? Yeah, it does work. We have this product. It takes a long time to get there. And everybody helped me together. Tech Garden, COE, and Doug, NEXUS-New York. Let me put Nexus out there. That being said, you, as an entrepreneur, you have to scavenge for almost everything. I got all my equipment off eBay. Used. Fingers crossed, they all worked when they came in. One did not work, I got full refund, including my tax and my shipping back, because I just threatened them. I'm going to write a serious bad review. I'm going to buy another product, which is $2. I'm going to buy a bad review for that too. I'm going to put in my own money. So he gave me my money back. No questions asked. The only new thing that I have is my refrigerator. That too, I got it from the shelf, which I had them discount, Home Depot discount that by half, around 30%. So you got to do that. You got to play all that. And that's really important for us, for entrepreneurs, to make each and every dollar count more than what GE or Samsung might count. The other advice from me is when you are a university startup, you got to develop a good rapport with the technology transfer office. I call, I'm from SUNY ESF, so I call first Ron Morgan, Scott Hancock, just to say hello, hey, how are you doing? and how is life, and that's it. Sometimes no talk about the commercialization, just to develop a good rapport. And then you can get what I call is, don't ask me $1,000 at one time. Okay, I'll give you $100 for the first 6 months, and then I'll give you, if I raise another grant, I'll give you another money later on. So you try to put terms like that. That's what you're supposed to do. Your technology does not matter. What matters is how do you execute that and bring it to scale. My full-time job that I almost quit on it. I make silly string and I work in a company that makes this little trees you hang in the car in Watertown. So it started off with such a small product, like trees you hang in the car. Pretty insignificant for us, but how did the guys scale it up? That's really of value. That guy came from Switzerland, running away during World War II, was a chemist, and deep in woods in Canada, one of the milkmen came and said, my car smells a lot. You're a chemist, do something. He took pine fragrance, put it on a block paper, put that on his car. That was an aha moment. So he built a nice big company with that, employs around 500 people. That little trees and that silly string employs 500 people. You can never underestimate, even if it's a small product, you can never underestimate what your product can do. Right now, I just hired 2 people part-time today. 2, and I already had 4 people. That boosts my confidence. I mean, I'm hiring 4 people. At one day, I was really looking for pennies, like, a year and a half back. I did not have money because I was doing this full-time. My grants weren't good enough to cover all my expenses, but then it's a test of time. You got to perfect yourself. I was a PhD. I did not know how to speak. I mean, I wasn't that good. I lost my touch on public speaking when I entered my PhD, but it takes time for you to get there. Do not get discouraged. You just have to keep blabbering until somebody listens to you and says, yeah, I'll fund it. Thanks.
Questions?
I have a question for you, Doug. You talked about you don't take equity in the companies. Is there a sustainability model that NEXUS has made you establish?
They want us to have one.
Yeah. And how long have you?
It's a requirement of our grant. So we actually owe NEXUS a sustainability report in a few months. Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough question, right? And frankly, I don't think equity answers that question, right? Because we're dealing with super early stage things. And so, we're going to take equity, so we're going to discourage people from even joining the program. And if it's 1 in 10 when you get started, we're taking things before they're company, so it's going to be lower than 1 in 10. And these things pay off 10 years down the road. So I personally don't see that as an answer to the sustainability question. I think NEXUS is the answer to the sustainability question. But we don't have to have that argument for 2 more months. It's a probably multifaceted approach.
So for your option number 3, that seems similar to what Mike McCoy and his group, the Alpha Stars, are doing down in Rome. Do you want to hear about that?
No, is this what the technology is coming out of the Air Force Base? I don't know a lot about it. I probably should know more. Yeah. So what are they doing?
So there's, from what I understand, they're looking through the patent portfolio, essentially putting together these business development teams around technologies.
Right. With students though, or
yeah, so it's students.
Yeah.
But essentially the model is we will serve to create the industry side of whatever the technology is.
Yeah.
So they're using students, but you're using.
Yeah, and there are big companies that are also doing that same thing with various departments of defense and other things. So I don't know how it works because they're trying to actually repurpose the military technologies, right? Yeah.
That's what they're doing in Rome.
Right.
What are they, like the SUNY IT kids or the SUNY whatever it is now kids?
It's
Because it's like,
Yeah. So the people that we would envision that would run the teams, and our option 3 would be business development professionals, people who've actually done it before. Okay. So people that are a little more street.
So are you, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, but are you paying them? Is there a stipend associated with it?
No, you're allowed to ask. The answer is I'm not exactly sure. We haven't figured out the details yet. So we have mentors in the program today that we actually pay a small stipend to. We are moving away from paying stipends to mentors. We actually think it creates some conflicts that are not helpful. But we may pay a stipend to someone who acts in a business development role. I mean, if it was me and you said, hey, you get to go play with some Cornell technology for 6 months, and we're going to pay all your expenses plus develop the technology, and maybe it's something that you can be a CEO of someday. I mean, to me, that feels like compensation enough, but we haven't really sorted out all the details yet. We need to do that.
but what kind of applicable, it's probably more limited ones. Whereas you're looking for people that seem to be, they've done it, they've exited, they can just not work for 6 months except for the time they're stuck up. Maybe not so much like high C-level executive from, Kodak or something. Was even on a check,
Yeah, so it's a challenge, right? So that's, and by the way, it's the same challenge with finding mentors. It's not easy, but we do have a pool of these folks who work in the program today. So we don't need a lot of them. We need a couple, right?
I was going to comment on that. I mean, to some extent, they don't necessarily need to be part of the team. What they need to be able to do is go into a university environment, understand what research they have, match that with the companies. It's nice that they stick along to carry that relationship, but they could really just be matchmakers to some extent as well.
It's possible. I think that would be good for the university. I'm not sure how it would work with our program.
Well, the question I had is, the people speaking with Cornell and working here, what are the, do you work with the other group of concept centers as well? And how does that whole ecosystem work?
Yeah. So NYSERDA has funded 3 proof of concept centers. So the other 2 are very different. They're one is run by, I always get the collaborations wrong. You probably know better than I do. One is run by Columbia, and who are the partners in the Columbia? It's actually Cornell's downstate campus. It is Stony Brook is a part, Brookhaven National Labs is a part, NYU and CUNY are part of it. Those are the basic universities, and the other 2 proof of concept centers. Again, I can't figure out where the line is drawn. But they co-branded under this PowerBridge name. They have a very different model. So they're looking to support fewer technologies. They support them. They have more money that they put into each technology, and they have less programmatic structure that they support. So to me, their program looks a lot like an SBIR grant. You can apply and get like $150,000 to mature your technology. You actually have to be a part of one of those universities. So you can't, if you're not at one of the named partner universities, you can't apply to that proof of concept center. So we can accept anyone from the state, whether you have a university affiliation or not. And we have a little less money per company. We have more programmatic structure, and we do work with them. So so we try to learn from them and figure out the best way to work together. This New York City event that we're having, right? We have no right going to New York City and trying to have an event on our own because we don't know anyone, right? So it's great to have partners down there who can help fill the room.
The NEXUS application had the entrepreneurial lead and the research lead were like the 2 main.
Right.
But the research lead was saying it doesn't have to and often isn't PI.
Correct.
So a grad student who's working on the technology can be the research lead.
Yeah.
And then someone in the business can be here.
Yeah.
So
We really don't define the roles for either of those people. We want one person. I mean, if you think about successful startups, there often is one person who owns the technology, one person who owns the business development. We're trying to replicate that, but we don't We don't say, geez, you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to have been an entrepreneur to be an entrepreneurial leader. You have to have been a CTO to be a technical lead. We just want people to fill those spots.
And how many people per team generally apply? Is it like a 4-person, 5-person team, or do you get 2-people teams?
We have 2-people teams. Yeah. I mean, I think when Gabriel applied to the program last year, he was a 1-person team, and we said, hey, we want you to be involved, but you have to find someone to work with. And he went out and recruited his second teammate, and he's recruited a few more now in the last 6 or 8 months. But we think there has to be at least 2.
I was a 2-member team.
Yours was 2-member, and some of the mentors are pretty active. You had a pretty active mentor, so it felt like a 3-person team at times, right?
I'm still in touch with my mentor. Your mentor that you get from all these programs is one of the biggest resources that you might be able to get from such programs. I met Paul for Clean Tech Open, another incubator, but that relationship was carried on to phase 1 and phase 2 of NEXUS. It's really important that you cement your relationship with your mentor.
I would agree with that 100%. Our mentor has a great, and the things to be really great and helpful.
Yeah.
The valuable resource.
There's a question back here. Yeah.
You mentioned energy.
Right.
Synthesize.
Yeah. So we use NYSERDA's definition, which is the so generation of clean energy or the reduction of CO2 is kind of the catch-all. I mean, really what we ask to make the argument.
Say something like energy efficiency.
Can be, yeah, we're technology agnostic, so we really just want someone to give us the argument for how much energy they can generate or how much CO2 they can save.
And you need to do some kind of applications quantifying, if we make our product this way, we're saving CO2 and CO2.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I can't remember exactly how we phrase it, but we do ask a question about energy benefits. The better applications will attempt to quantify at least, yeah, even if it's, back of the napkin calculation.
Yeah, just to go back to the source of the funds comes from NYSERDA, so it's really this NYSERDA definition. So you're responsible to their sponsor. So there are, there's a New York State clean energy plan, and the clean energy plan has targets for benefits. So it has to be the innovation that has to relate to energy. It has to have an argument about why it's cleaner compared to traditional technology.
Yeah.
So that's.
I think, frankly, one of our I would say that I'm personally conflicted because, some of I think there's lots of smaller, pragmatic technology, and maybe things like full circle, right? Where I mean, are you going to save the world? Probably not, but you can actually move the needle, right? Whereas, if I'm developing next generation solar cell, okay, maybe that's world saving, but the probability of success is so low. So, we do try to weigh, we have this debate every time we get applications is, but that one doesn't have a huge energy benefit, but it seems pragmatic and achievable. And there's certainly gray area.
Is part of your assistance helping to kind of create a strategy or finding access to other grants or funds that would be applicable, maybe even other NYSERDA grants that would be?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll let these guys answer that question. I mean, I don't know that we talk about other grants. We have. I do think that if you go through our program, there is a sort of good housekeeping stamp of approval that you get, and so I think you're viewed differently by NYSERDA. You've applied for, you applied for a couple of grants, right? Or in the process of NSF, NYSERDA.
Yeah.
You've done the same, I think, right? Yeah. So we recognize NYSERDA asks us to try to accomplish a couple things, right? And one of the success metrics is that if our companies go on to win further grants.
So NSF has a similar program called APCO, but we don't have an NSF project for it. Just when I had my first talk with the program director with SBIR, and I told him that, hey, we were funded by NYSERDA, and later on we went to do a cohort with Nexus, which is similar to your alpha, and that just did double, and that really helped. As I said earlier, once you go through Nexus, it actually makes you want to think like an entrepreneur. As a technologist, we think that technology does everything, but it's also about how you execute it. That's what Nexus will help, and that's when you can play that card for the grants and funding.
We're trying to develop relationships as well. I spent a little time with the Department of Energy trying to understand their various programs, and we know enough people there. We've made connections with our companies to NREL and people to DOE. So we're trying to do as much there as we can. So last request is please come to our demo day. Please spread the word. I mean, I think that we haven't had as much representation from Syracuse as we would like. I think it's been a little bit of a disappointment. We're going to try to do a better job of getting the word out and spending some time up the hill. But people in the room, I think, probably know all the right people in town. So
and the application is open October 15th?
October 15th, the draft form should be on our website now, but I think it's not. I have to try to get that fixed in the next day or two. The application form itself is intended to be very simple. It's about 6 or 8 open-ended questions and then a couple of check boxes. So if you could fill it out, you could fill it out in an hour. It probably will take more time if you want to properly think it through, but it's not an SBIR grant type process where you have to set aside a month and do nothing but write.
Doug,
Thank you.
Bob.